Shalom, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of our Kosher Curiosities series, where we explore various ideas in kashrut. We are continuing today something that we kind of left in the balance last week with regards to eating meat. The subject of last week was, am I supposed to be a vegetarian? So we established last week that really the way that Hashem had intended to create the world was that human beings should only be eating vegetables or greenery. But as a result of the sin of Adam Arishon and the sin of the generations, we had to make a boundary and a separation between ourselves and the Baalei Chaim, the other living creatures, and try to elevate those living creatures who are below us in our status of Kedusha to our level. And we do that through the consumption of meat, where we separate the good that's from the Baalei Chaim, and again elevate to the appropriate levels, and there will come one day where all of the four, that would be the medaber, the human being, the animals, which are the baalei chaim, the tzomeach, that which grows and sprouts, the trees and the grass, and then the last one is the domem, the stationary objects, will all be one and all be equal. We're going to continue this theme, speaking specifically today about how Jewish people, the Jews specifically, how were they allowed, or when were they allowed to consume meat? At which point in history did that actually happen? And then we will speak a little bit about the dangers with regards to the ta'avot, the desire, the lust towards meat, and how the Torah warns us about this in a few places. And lastly, we will talk about some of the ethics, which is what tonight's title is, the ethics surrounding the consumption of meat, and how the Torah enforced and gave us certain mitzvot to make sure that when we do eat meat, it's done with proper consideration of the animals. So again, we are studying the Sefer of Peninei Halacha from Rabbi Eliezer Melamed in chapter 14 called Achilat Basar, and part 4 where he begins. Mitechila, at the beginning. Kasher hayu Yisrael bamidbar 40 shana. When the Jewish people were in the desert for 40 years, smuchim lamishkan velamizbeach, very close to the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and the altar, the Mizbeach, where they used to sacrifice the animals and burn them and offer them. Hutar lahem lechol basar behema rak b'miskeret korban shlamim. The only method that the Jewish people were able to eat meat at that time was if they offered a korban shlamim, which is a peace offering, and they had a portion of that meat, and they would enjoy that meat. לאחר שהיו שוחטים את הקורבן והכהנים היו מזים את דמו על המזבח ומעלים את חלביו על אש המזבח ונותנים את חלקם מבשר הקורבן. So after they would shech the animal, and the kohanim would sprinkle the blood on the mizbeach and bring up the forbidden fats on the altar to be burned, and then they would take the appropriate portions of the animal from the korban, then and only then Rashaim Hayu Yisrael lechol mi besaro betahara. Only then the Jewish people would be allowed to partake from that meat, assuming that they were in a state of purity. However, when the Am Yisrael entered Israel, and now started to dwell and take ownership of the land and living throughout the land, far away from the temple, then it was permitted to slaughter animals in all places, and to eat animals without actually having to bring them as a korban on the mizbeach. And the pasuk actually tells us this in Sefer Devarim. Kirchak mimecha hamakom. We actually read this last week. Kirchak mimecha hamakom. When you are far from the place, from the Bet Hamikdash, Asher yivchar Hashem Elohecha lasum shemo sham, that place which Hashem chose to place His name, v'zavachta mibekarecha umitzonecha Asher natan Hashem lecha kasher tzivita. All right, and then you will slaughter from your animals and from your sheep that Hashem gave you, like He commanded you. V'achalta bisharecha v'chol avat nafshecha, and you will eat within your gate according to the desires of your soul. So we see over here that once you are far away from the Mizbeach, or once you enter the land, you're far away from the Mizbeach and the Bet HaMikdash, it would be permitted, it would be allowed for you to slaughter animals whenever you want. What do we see? That at the beginning, the whole concept of eating meat that meat was sanctified through the offering of the korban shlamim. But once the Jewish people were merited to enter the Holy Land, now that kedusha no longer just remained in the Bet HaMikdash, it spread completely through the entire land. And now, as long as you slaughter that animal according to halacha, according to the rules that are brought down in the Rambam and Shulchan Aruch, you may partake from that meat because that meat actually has kedusha as well. If Shalomar, we can actually say from here, through the merit that Am Yisrael sanctify themselves through the service of God, they have a higher degree, they're at a higher degree, a higher level than other living creatures. And now they are able to eat meat even though they are not actually officially sacrificing this animal on the Mizbeach. Yoter mize, not only that, we can add the following. In the merit that the Jewish people were able to bring korbanot as a mitzvah and fulfilling a mitzvah like reading the Torah, they can continue one step later, continue this idea of korban through eating. When the Jewish people eat for the sake of heaven, their consumption is equivalent to the bringing of a korban. The eating itself, something we spoke a little bit about last week, is able to raise a person to a higher level of godly service, and it's as if you are bringing a korban. So it's unbelievable what we're saying over here. We're saying that the fact that a person can eat, they're eating meat today, especially in situations such as Shabbat and Yom Tov, which we addressed last week, it's ke'ilu a person is bringing a korban to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's in fact what we say, one of the psukim that we say before Birkat Hamazon, this shulchan, this table that we're eating at and we're having our seudah is mamash lifnei Hashem. It's in front of God, just like the mizbeach that we offered and brought those animals in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Same idea here. A person has to always consider his table like the mizbeach, and therefore the meat and everything that is on it is meant and solely meant for us to raise our levels in kedusha, in holiness, and our avodat Hashem. We actually saw this very clearly by Noach. Because as a result of the korban, he was allowed to eat the meat. Before the flood, what did the pasuk say? Hashem said to Noach, come to the ark. I see that you are a big tzaddik. No one else is a tzaddik, but you are. I want you to take 7 kosher animals. I want you to take 2 of the non-kosher animals. And I want you to take 7 of the kosher birds. All right? But he just had to take them. After the flood was over and Noah came out of the ark, הבין שהשם ציווה אותו להביא לתיבה מהמינים הטהורים 7 כדי שיוכל לעלות מהם קורבן. He realized, what was the purpose of me saving these animals? It must be because he wants me to bring them as a korban. וכן עשה, that's exactly what Noach did. ויבן נוח מזבח להשם, ויקח מכל הבהמה הטהורה, מכל העוף הטהור, ויעלו במזבח. Noach built an altar, and he took of the kosher animals, and he offered them on that mizbeach. And what happened right after that? לאחר מכן הוטל לנוח וזרעו לאכול בשר. So again, we see here, through the achieving and of the sacrifice that Noach did, he was allowed to eat meat. Okay, so therefore that's how it came to be that the Jewish people were allowed to eat meat. Before the Jewish people it was Noach. That was the whole concept of after Noach came out of the ark. But for the Jewish people specifically, it was only after they entered the land of Israel were they able to slaughter animals on their own and partake from that meat. The problem is that partaking in meat and consuming a lot of meat can lead a person to desires and lusts that can be dangerous, as we see in many places in the Torah, and that's what Rabbi Melamed goes on to explain right now. Even though we now said, okay, you're allowed to eat meat. Person has to be very careful, very wary, that the fact that there is that you eat so much meat can bring a person to uncontrollable ta'avot with regards to meat. It can bring a person to serious levels of animalistic feelings and as well as to sin. We see in the Torah that the desire to eat meat caused the Jewish people to sin. Shneimar, the pasuk says, he's going to go on and quote a few psukim from Parashat Ba'alotcha. I'll read them and translate them. The multitude that were amongst them, they had a tremendous desire, a big desire. They started crying to Moshe, who is going to feed us meat? Moshe complained to God, and he said, where am I going to get meat from? That they're crying to me and they're saying they want the meat. They're like children saying, I want. Moshe saying, where am I supposed to get meat from? Moshe says, I had it with these people. I can't carry them anymore. It's too much for me to bear. Moshe Rabbeinu was commanded to answer them. Because you need to tell them, you need to let them know that a punishment is going to come if their request is fulfilled. Because you're going to have so much meat, it's going to come out of your nostrils, and it's going to be nauseating to you. Because you were disgusted with God that who was amongst you. You didn't care for the man, you wanted the meat. The fact that you're here crying and complaining, why did you take us out from Egypt? And what does the pasuk say? The wind came from God, and quails swept from the sea, and all of those people who desired the meat, they got up. They started piling the quails that were coming. Hamamit, the least among them, asara chomarim. He piled 10 heaps. And spread them all around the camp. And while the quail was in their mouth, right prior to being struck, God came and struck them down, and that place unfortunately was known as Kivrot HaTa'ava, the burial of those who had desire. Of course, the desire for meat. Kisham kavru ta'am hamitavim. So what do we see from here? Mitoch kach, he says, just a person has tremendous lust and desires to eat meat, and it can bring a person to severe sin, and even in the case of the Torah, a makkah, a death. Because it extinguishes the light that of the neshama, and therefore a person dies. In order to distance ourselves from such desire, the Torah specifically refers to the eating of meat as a ta'ava. A ta'ava in Musar, in the books of Musar, is always referring to something not good. When you have a ta'ava for something, whether it's a ta'ava for television, or a ta'ava for movies, or a ta'ava for, God forbid, theft or adultery or any of the severe sins, it's referred to as a ta'ava. And that's how the Torah refers to as a consumption of meat. Shneimar, because the pasuk says, "Ki yarchiv Adonai Elohecha et gevulecha," when Hashem will expand your borders, kasher dibelach ve'amarta ochela basar, and you shall eat meat. Ki taveh nafshecha lebechol basar, because your soul has a desire to eat meat. Bechol avad nafshecha tuchal basar. Ve'im ta'ava yesh ba'achilat basar, and if you have a ta'ava, this desire to eat meat, haresh ra'ui lerisna, it must mean that you have to restrain yourself. You can't just go all in, because you're going to lose total control. The Gemara tells us in Masechet Chulin, Limdat Torah derech eretz. The Torah is actually teaching us a way of life. Here, derech eretz, in the context here, is not in reference to just being a nice person and having derech eretz. It's a way of life, how to live properly. Shelo yochal adam basar ela leteavot. A person should only eat meat when he has a craving for meat, but not the desire to go chase and eat and buy the best cuts and have barbecues every single night to the point where it's coming, like to us, it's coming out of their nostrils or still their mouthful constantly. If you really want to have some meat, then you can have meat. After the 9 days of before Tisha B'Av, no one has meat. After Tisha B'Av, everybody wants to have meat. Okay, come Shabbat, Pesach, everybody wants to have the meat. Beseder, you can have meat. It's good, as we said. But when you want to have meat, not a strong desire. Not only that, the rabbis learned from this pasuk something unbelievable. A person, the wanting of meat should not lead a person to diminishing his funds as a result of this. The pasuk says ki yarchiv, meaning when his borders are expanding, meaning he has enough wealth to afford the meat. And even if you have the money to buy the meat, so meaning you have to first be at a certain status to afford meat, and Hashem will provide you, then you can go buy it. But then, you shall slaughter from your cattle and from your sheep. Meaning only a small part of your cattle, a small part of your sheep, that's what you can eat. Right? In order so that your cattle and your sheep continue to grow multitude, so that you will have more, they will continue to breed, and you'll have more and more cows and sheep. Because you should know this is a very good rule in general. If you want to think about what is allowed in life, everything that is allowed in life that you're allowed to do, a person should only devote and dedicate a little bit of his money, a little bit of his funds to that which is permitted to him. Just because a person has Baruch Hashem good parnasah, he doesn't go and spend all of his money on the highest end meat, hanger steaks, filet mignon, sirloins, and tomahawks. I know I'm very familiar with the cuts of meat and all these guys spending tons and tons of money on this. It's not something that is advisable. So what do you do with the rest of your money? He says put them into more important things. He says invest them in more important parts of life. Food, meat, as much as it's very tasty and people enjoy it. All right, there are more important things in life that you can put your money towards, and best is yashkia bechokma. He says invest in wisdom. So buying sfarim, buying books, buying sifrei Torah, buying anything that's going to help elevate your spirituality. Okay, and the last piece that we're going to do today, which is more connected to the title of the class, is the concept of that even though we're allowed to eat meat, we see that the Torah, whenever any connection to meat whatsoever, there is a certain element of mercy involved, rachmanut involved. He explains the following: even though a person is allowed to eat from living creatures, we see so many mitzvot in the Torah where we are to behave with these animals with a high sense of mercy, of rachamim. And through that, it will direct our hearts and our thoughts to this ethical dilemma of actually eating meat. Because you know what's going to happen in the future. Like we explained last week, in the times of Mashiach, when everything is going to end, everything is going to revert back to the original way it was meant to be, where the animals are going to be on our level. And therefore, we have to prepare ourselves for that. So he says, he goes, I'm going to summarize very shortly, very briefly, 6 mitzvot that deal with this concept of having mercy with regard to the consumption or the eating meat process. Harishona, number 1, Isur achilat ever min hachai. There's a prohibition to eat the limb of a live animal. Kilomar, asur litlosh ever min be'ema be'oda be'chaim ulochlo. A person is not allowed to detach a limb from a live animal and eat it. Hatam lekach pashut. The reason it's pretty obvious. Zu achzariut nora'a lachtoch ever mi behema chaya. It is total cruelty, one of the worst forms of cruelty you can have. He's going to use that word a lot. Achzariut, cruelty. Velirot bike'eva v'tzara. You're tearing a limb from a live animal and you're watching it scream in pain. uleanot achar kach mitam besara, and then only just so that you can enjoy the taste of its meat. Mitzvah zu chala gam al bnei Noach. You should know that this is one of the 7 mitzvot of the children of Noach. So even the non-Jews are obligated to keep this mitzvah. Unfortunately, many don't. Many go out and they will cause a lot of harm to animals, tie them up and dissect them while they're alive. It's a horrible, horrible thing. Now, even though the non-Jews are able to eat any animal, they don't require shechita, they don't require slaughtering. It's only after they're actually dead may they partake from the animal. They cannot partake from the animal while the animal is alive. So that's the first mitzvah where we see this element of mercy. Hashniya, the second mitzvah, shechita. Shechita is slaughtering. We are commanded to slaughter the animal at the neck. Any animal that was not shechted properly or was not shechted at all, it has the status of a nevela, okay? And that cannot be eaten. It's asur to eat that animal. The same law would apply to a bird. Even though the whole mitzvah of shechita is one of those mitzvot that's considered a chok, it's very difficult to understand its reason. We might not know the reason. Certainly there's an expression of mercy here, like we'll explain later on in his book. Now with regards to birds, birds are in the class of animals, are on the lower scale in terms of their relevance and importance in the animal world. Okay, therefore, they only have to slaughter one siman in the neck. There are 2 simanim that need to be slaughtered for an animal, but for a bird, it's only one is required. And then there's even lower than that. Dagim v'chagavim, you have grasshoppers and fish, shemocham uma'arechet atavim, where their brains and their nervous system pachot mifutachim, they're even less than that, the birds. Umistaber shegam tchushat ha'ke'ev shelem amuma yoter, they don't really feel the pain as much as the other animals. Lo nitzavinu lishchot klal, they can be eaten even without shechita, even without slaughtering. V'gam en bahem isur ever min hachai, and even they don't have this isur of ever min hachai, eating from a live from it live. Shlishit, the third mitzvah that implies a certain level of mercy. We're not allowed to eat or drink the blood of an animal or bird. And the Sefer HaChinuch explains again, by drinking blood, again expresses this form of cruelty. Because the blood of an animal is very similar to the blood of man. That's the life source of the animal, the creature, the person, and therefore it would be disgusting to do so. Revi'it, the fourth mitzvah, mitzvah lechasot dam chaya ve'of le'achar shechida. There's a mitzvah to cover the blood of an animal or the bird that was slaughtered. If shalomah she'etzad shel achsariyut b'achilat habasar ve'od dam chaya ve'of shevuchim al haaretz. Again, it's very cruel to partake and consume animals or birds while their blood is still in front of you on the ground. There is this expression of shame in the fact that by not covering the blood, by covering the blood, we are also expressing this idea of shame that we are forced to eat from these animals because of our own wants to. But when in reality, of course, we learn that Hashem doesn't want us to eat from these, as was His intent at the start of the world. Hamishit, the fifth mitzvah, shelo lishchot behema ubena biyom echad. There is a mitzvah that one is not allowed to slaughter an animal and its child on the same day. Even though we could slaughter an animal to eat it, cannot slaughter the mother and the child. Again, cruel. And we're worried that if the mother were to see the child being slaughtered or vice versa, it would increase the pain and the agony that is being felt by the animal. So yes, we do care about the animal's feelings. Shishit, Another mitzvah, gam mitzvat shiluach haken, when we send away the mother from the chicks, the baby from the baby birds. Ladad mefarshim rabim, according to the opinion of many commentators, no'adad limnoam tsa'ar ma'em. The whole purpose is so that when we take the babies, it is to prevent tsa'ar from the mother. Now there are other mitzvot connected to the concept of tsa'ar ba'alei chayim, causing pain to living creatures. Not for now, that's a different subject. Okay, so beyond the 6 that we just mentioned, there are other mitzvot that have to do with that. But he concludes the following: Hare lanu, we have with us, she'af she'atorah hitira lanu lechol basar. He concludes that even though the Torah allowed us to eat meat, ratzta limnoa otanu milidarder ayidei kach l'achzariut v'atimut klape tzaram sheba'alei chayim. It wanted to prevent us from deteriorating through this and becoming more cruel or dull and insensitive to the feelings of the animals. And therefore we have all of these mitzvot not to increase chas v'shalom the tzar of the animals. And like I said, there are other mitzvot that he did not, that are nonetheless, that also have to do with tzar ba'alei achayim, which maybe we'll get to another day. In his notes, and we'll conclude with here, he mentions that there are some experts that will go on to say that eating meat could be hazardous to one's health. You will find on the internet many articles and opinions about the ill effects of eating meat and whether or not a person should listen to those opinions. So what he writes over here is that although there are opinions that say that, they are just a minority opinion. It's a minority opinion, and therefore there are most of the experts in nutrition will tell you that that red meat is good to a certain extent. It's very good for you, and therefore you cannot say that they don't know what they're talking about. So if most of the opinions or the doctors or the people that do these studies are holding that meat is not hazardous to a person's health, then certainly it would be okay to follow the majority. In fact, that's what we actually do in this case. We follow the majority. That's why we're allowed to eat meat. However, he does make a point to say that if you are the person that believes that meat is indeed hazardous to your health, and like you truly believe it, and you've done your research and you've done your investigation, and that you are convinced that eating red meat or chicken, whatnot, is going to be hazardous to your health, he says you would not be allowed to eat meat. You're not allowed to eat meat. You probably wouldn't want to eat meat because you've done these investigations, but nevertheless you wouldn't be allowed to, because you would be, according to your logic, you would be harming your body, and that's something that you would have to stay away from. And with this, we conclude tonight's shiur. Thank you, everybody, for joining. And Be'ezrat Hashem, we will tackle a brand new topic next week, and we hope to see you there. Wishing everybody a wonderful evening.